This video contains descriptions of disturbing criminal behavior involving a child. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. It was a quiet spring day in Purcell, Oklahoma, April 12, 2006. 10-year-old Jamie Rose Bolin left her apartment barefoot, like she often did, and headed for the public library just down the street. She told her father she'd be back in time for dinner. But dinner came and went, and Jamie never returned. In a town with fewer than 6,000 people, where neighbors know each other's dogs by name, this kind of thing just didn't happen. Jamie had a routine. Library, maybe a quick stop by the gas station for a soda, then straight home. That Wednesday, she disappeared somewhere along that familiar route. And by nightfall, panic had begun to sink its claws into the community. Her father, Curtis Bolin, reported her missing around 9 p.m. He told police she was wearing a pink T-shirt with Bratz on the front and blue jeans. Nothing else. No shoes, no phone, no money. Just Jamie, a free-spirited fifth grader who loved reading about mythology and drawing horses in her notebook. Within hours, local police were out in force. Flashlights swept over drainage ditches, dumpsters, backyards, and brush near the apartment complex. A missing child alert was issued, but despite the rapid response, there was no sign of Jamie. The next morning, search crews expanded their radius. The FBI was called in. Volunteers began organizing on Facebook and at local churches. Local stores taped missing posters to windows. The small-town calm of Purcell fractured under the weight of uncertainty. The idea that a child could simply vanish here, in broad daylight, was too much to comprehend. Every possibility was on the table. Had she been kidnapped? Had she run away? Or, unthinkably, had something worse happened? Jamie was a smart, expressive child who lived with her father in an apartment complex on West Washington Street. She was known for her curiosity and her love for fantasy books. According to neighbors, she was often seen walking to the library alone, but everyone kept an eye out for her. Her father had full custody. Her mother lived in another town. It was just the two of them navigating life together. Jamie was described as trusting, friendly, and innocent in a way that now made everyone uneasy in hindsight. On that day, she told a friend she wanted to be a missionary someday. She even offered a little girl in the library her candy. That was Jamie. A neighbor said later, pure-hearted, sweet, no fear in her. But someone had noticed that. Authorities pulled surveillance footage from the library and nearby businesses. They saw Jamie enter the library around 3 p.m., browse the shelves, and exit a short while later. No one suspicious appeared to be following her. No vehicle abduction was caught on camera. She had vanished between one camera and the next. Then a librarian remembered something. A man had been lingering near the children's section. Quiet, average-looking. He didn't speak to Jamie, but his presence lingered in her mind. He didn't seem to be reading, just watching. Investigators made note of it, but there was no real lead, no name, no plate, no obvious connection. Jamie's backpack and sketchbook were not recovered. Her pink shirt would later be described in every media report. It became a symbol of the innocence that had been stolen from Purcell. In the early hours of April 13th, a man came into the police station, claiming to have seen Jamie boarding a blue pickup truck. The lead turned cold quickly. It was a case of mistaken identity. Others reported seeing her at a Walmart, at a gas station, or walking down a trail. None of the tips checked out. By day 3, the fear had taken root. Parents were keeping their children home from school. The local paper ran a headline in bold block letters. Whereas Jamie Rose Bolin, a reward fund was opened. State investigators joined the effort. Authorities knocked on every door in the apartment complex where Jamie lived. They spoke with every neighbor, including one man, polite, quiet, and helpful, who said he hadn't seen Jamie that day. His name was Kevin Ray Underwood. He lived just 2 doors down from Jamie and her father. At first glance, There was nothing threatening about Underwood. He was 26, worked at a grocery store, and lived alone. He was the type of neighbor you'd barely notice. Kept to himself, said hi in the hallway, rarely caused any trouble. When police came by to question him, he was cooperative, calm, said Jamie must have gone out the back way. Maybe someone picked her up. He hoped she was safe. He let them take a quick look around. They saw nothing suspicious. But something about him made a few officers uneasy. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Detached, cold, almost rehearsed. Still, they had no evidence. No cause for arrest. So they moved on, but he didn't leave their radar. Behind the scenes, digital forensic teams began scouring local internet activity. Chat rooms, message boards, search histories. That's when they stumbled onto something disturbing. Someone in Purcell had been posting on fringe forums, dark corners of the internet that most people never hear about. Discussions about violent fantasies, about control, about things too graphic to say out loud. One user had recently made a post referencing a new plan, one involving a girl, one that would, in his words, finally make me feel something. The IP address traced back to apartment 5, Kevin Underwood's apartment. Lexington, Oklahoma isn't the kind of place where kids disappear. The town is small, population just over 2,000. Most people know each other by name. It's a place where front doors were still left unlocked in 2006, until the afternoon of April 12th, when 10-year-old Jamie Rose Bolin never came home. Her father, Curtis, was the first to feel something was off. Jamie was supposed to meet him after spending time at the local library, a short walk from their apartment complex. But the hours dragged on. No calls, no signs of her. Not a single person had seen her walk back. By early evening, Curtis was pacing the apartment parking lot. By nightfall, he called the police. And just like that, the illusion of safety in Lexington shattered. Police moved quickly. The town's entire police department, along with the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, began canvassing the area. They issued an Amber Alert before midnight. Jamie's photo was on every local news broadcast. Missing person flyers were stapled to telephone poles within hours. She was described as a bubbly, friendly girl with a big smile, last seen in a red t-shirt and blue jeans. Her picture captured the innocence of childhood, wide eyes, warm grin, now plastered across a town gripped by fear. Volunteers gathered at the Lexington Police Department, forming search parties to comb fields, wooded areas, creeks, and abandoned lots. Helicopters hovered overhead. Bloodhounds were brought in. It was all hands on deck. But as day 2 passed, nothing turned up. No clothing, no shoes, no signs of a struggle. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. Theories spread fast. Some thought Jamie had run away, maybe to visit a friend. Others whispered about a stranger in a white truck seen circling the neighborhood. Parents began walking their kids to school. Stores in town locked their doors earlier. There was a sudden urgency in the air. Everyone was looking over their shoulder. Curtis, Jamie's father, was questioned, standard procedure. So were family friends. Police checked the backgrounds of sex offenders in the area. Every single one. It was a brutal but necessary reality. When a child disappears, you look close to home. But nothing about Jamie's life suggested she would run. She had no history of behavioral problems. Her home life was stable. She adored her father, and he was fiercely protective of her. So where was she? Investigators turned to the last known location, the Lexington Public Library. Jamie had been there for about 2 hours on the afternoon she vanished. A small, modest building, the kind with just a few rows of bookshelves and a couple of internet computers. Staff remembered her clearly. She was polite, talkative. She checked out some books and chatted briefly with the librarian about a homework assignment. Witnesses saw her leave around 4 p.m. But then, silence. No one saw which direction she walked. No surveillance cameras showed her on the sidewalks. Even more unsettling, The library was just 500 feet from her apartment complex. That's a 2-minute walk. Somewhere in that narrow gap of time and distance, she had vanished. While police were speaking to neighbors, knocking on doors, and double-checking alibis, one resident stood out. Not for anything he said, but for how he said it. Kevin Underwood, a 26-year-old grocery store clerk who lived in the same apartment complex, just one floor below Jamie. He answered the door politely, allowed police to look inside, and said he hadn't seen her that day. He even agreed to let them search his computer. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance. Kevin had no prior record, no complaints from neighbors, and seemed socially awkward but harmless. One officer even described him as soft-spoken and cooperative. But something lingered, a feeling the detectives couldn't shake. There was a strange stillness in his apartment, an odd smell, a clean floor that looked recently scrubbed, and Kevin seemed nervous, not frantic like a panicked neighbor, nervous like someone waiting to be found out. Still, there was no evidence, no probable cause. Not yet. Behind the scenes, analysts had begun combing through digital footprints, online forums, blogs, and computer history from local suspects. That's when they found Kevin's blog. At first, it looked like the musings of an isolated man, journal entries about loneliness, depression, even intrusive thoughts. But as they read further, something far darker emerged. In one entry, Kevin wrote about violent urges, fantasies involving torture and control. He described feeling like he was losing his grip. He wrote, "I just want to give in to the monster inside me." The entries weren't just disturbing, they were chillingly specific. References to how he would act out one day, warnings that he was dangerous. No names were mentioned, but the timeline matched up too closely to ignore. It wasn't a confession, but it was a red flag the size of a billboard. At this point, the FBI joined the investigation. They were briefed on the blog, the strange behavior, and the fact that Kevin had been home during the narrow window of Jamie's disappearance. Agents returned to his apartment the following day. They asked again, had he seen Jamie? Did he know where she might be? And this time his answer wavered. Kevin paused, then muttered, "Go ahead and arrest me. She's in there." He motioned toward the closet. And just like that, the nightmare took form. The apartment was still, dim, sterile. Kevin Ray Underwood stood in the doorway, blinking behind thick glasses, arms at his sides like he wasn't sure what to do with them. When the FBI agents knocked, he didn't ask why they were there. He didn't hesitate. He simply said, "Come in." Inside, Kevin's home was orderly. Too orderly. Not just clean, but deliberately arranged. Walls lined with horror DVDs, a collection of fantasy novels, stacks of journals neatly arranged on a coffee table. But it wasn't the tidiness that gave investigators pause. It was a silence. No music, no TV, just Kevin, watching. He looked blank. The agent sat across from him and began with casual questions. Where had he been the day Jamie disappeared? Had he seen anything unusual? Any unfamiliar cars? Strangers? Kevin answered with quick, rehearsed precision. "I was home all day." "Did you see Jamie at all that afternoon?" "No." Then one agent noticed a scratch on Kevin's hand. "Where's that from?" Kevin looked down, almost surprised to see it. "Oh, my cat." They asked about his car, a red Hyundai Elantra parked just outside. Kevin said it hadn't moved in days. Something wasn't sitting right, not because of what Kevin said, but because of what he didn't. He showed no concern for Jamie. No fear, no urgency. And when they asked if they could take a quick look inside his vehicle, he didn't even blink. "Sure," he said. "Go ahead." That's when everything changed. Inside the trunk, agents found a plastic storage container. Heavy, latched. Inside it, duct tape, a large serrated saw, meat tenderizer, and latex gloves. Then came the clincher. Blood. The agents didn't need to push further. Kevin was arrested on the spot. Back at the station, with no lawyers present and the room recorder quietly rolling, Kevin sat down and sighed, and then he began to talk. The confession came slowly at first. Then, as if a dam broke, the flood came. Kevin spoke for hours. Flat, emotionless, almost clinical. He admitted to luring Jamie into his apartment with the promise of letting her see his pet rat. Once she was inside, he shut the door. There was no screaming, he said, no fighting. She trusted him. That somehow made it easier. He told agents he struck her over the head with a wooden cutting board, that when she didn't die right away, he choked her until she stopped breathing, that he sexually assaulted her post-mortem. He admitted that he had intended to eat her body. The agent sat in stunned silence as Kevin, calm as a man reading a grocery list, detailed his plan. How he had fantasized for years about killing and cannibalizing someone. How he spent time in online forums discussing hardvore, a niche and disturbing internet subculture involving fantasies of consuming human flesh. He said Jamie wasn't the first child he considered. She was just the one who showed up in his journals. Investigators later found meticulous entries outlining his fantasy life. Violent, dark, and horrifying in detail. He wrote of wanting to try necrophilia and cannibalism, and believed killing someone would help him feel something. Kevin Underwood wasn't just a killer. He was a predator who had been building toward this moment for years. Online, he vented about his loneliness, his rage, his sense of invisibility. But offline, he played the role of the harmless neighbor. Quiet, awkward, forgettable. But he hadn't been invisible to Jamie. She had smiled at him, waved, spoken kindly to him, and he had used that trust to kill her. The community of Purcell reeled as news broke. People didn't want to believe it. Kevin, that odd, soft-spoken guy from Apartment 5, the one who blogged about cartoons and loneliness? But the evidence was undeniable. Not just a confession, but Jamie's body, found wrapped in plastic in a large Rubbermaid container inside Kevin's bedroom closet, hidden beneath blankets and laundry, as though her existence could be folded away like a secret. The town mourned, and parents stared at their doors a little longer at night. The tragedy was now personal. It had crept into their apartment buildings, their libraries, their grocery stores. And all the while, Kevin Ray Underwood sat in a small, locked cell, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Kevin Ray Underwood didn't look like a killer. That was a phrase repeated again and again in media reports, in hushed conversations among neighbors, in the courtroom gallery, where reporters clutched notepads and parents sat white-knuckled. But when psychologists reviewed Kevin's writings, his browser history, and his confession tapes, it became clear. The real Kevin had been hiding in plain sight, not just from others, but from himself. What lived inside Kevin wasn't sudden rage. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was something more chilling, premeditated, obsessive, and cold. He didn't snap. He planned. The journals told the story long, before Jamie's name was ever written in blood. He wrote about loneliness like it was a disease eating away at him. He described himself as a failure, someone invisible to women, awkward in social settings, and consumed by self-hatred. But where most people struggle quietly, Kevin's isolation twisted into something darker, a thirst for control, for dominance, for the ultimate taboo. He fantasized about the act of murder not as rebellion or revenge, but as completion. In his mind, the violence would make him feel powerful, whole, not invisible anymore. Investigators uncovered online forum threads where Kevin engaged in conversations about hardvore, violent necrophilia, and graphic fantasies of killing. They weren't jokes. They were blueprints. Step by step, he was rehearsing the real thing in the shadows of the internet. And still offline, he was careful. He had no criminal record, no history of violence. A former grocery store clerk, unemployed at the time of Jamie's murder, he was polite to neighbors, even if a bit strange. Some recalled seeing him pace in the parking lot, talking to himself. Others noted his dark sense of humor. But no one imagined the kind of darkness that lived just beyond his smile. A forensic psychiatrist later described Kevin's mental state using a chilling phrase: organized depravity. He wasn't psychotic. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he didn't care. In fact, the very fact that it was forbidden, that it was monstrous, excited him. His confession was laced with phrases like, "I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't stop myself." A strange duality: detached responsibility paired with obsessive desire. He spoke of hearing voices sometimes, but evaluations determined he didn't suffer from schizophrenia or any major thought disorder. What he did suffer from was something harder to pin down. Some experts labeled it as extreme sexual sadism. Others suggested antisocial personality disorder. But many came to a haunting consensus. Kevin Ray Underwood was not insane. He was evil. At trial, prosecutors leaned heavily on this distinction. They argued that Kevin had acted with full awareness, full planning, and full intent. He had bought the tools beforehand. The saw, the meat tenderizer, the duct tape, not in a fit of madness, but over time, carefully, deliberately. He had rehearsed this. On his blog, chillingly titled The Sinister Hideaway, he posted just 2 days before the murder: "If you were to look at me and think he's harmless, just a big teddy bear, you'd be wrong. Very wrong." The post was time-stamped, public, there for anyone to read. But no one had, and by the time they did, it was too late. Jamie's death wasn't the result of a mental break. It was the culmination of years of unchecked fantasy, of a mind rotting slowly under layers of shame, desire, and secrecy. Kevin was never looking for help. He was waiting for opportunity, and he found it. He had no known accomplices, no friends to confide in, just a glowing computer screen and a storm brewing inside. In the courtroom, Jamie's family wept silently as Kevin sat motionless. He offered no apology, no emotion, no explanation beyond what was already written in blood and ink. When asked directly if he had any remorse, he simply replied, "Not really. I know I should, but I don't feel anything." It was that final sentence that haunted people most, not just because a little girl was dead, but because the man who killed her felt nothing. This was the face of modern evil, not a snarling monster in the woods, not a stranger in a van, but a quiet neighbor upstairs, a man who held the door open, who smiled, who kept his secrets in folders labeled "Do Not Open." By the time anyone did, it was already too late. The courtroom was silent as Kevin Ray Underwood shuffled in, shackled and stone-faced. It had been months since Jamie's body was found in a plastic tub beneath a trapdoor in Kevin's apartment, but time had not dulled the horror. If anything, the details had only grown more grotesque in the retelling, the media coverage, the leaked confession, the courtroom sketches of a man who looked far too ordinary to have done what he had. The prosecution came with a single purpose: secure the death penalty. They wanted the world to know this crime would not fade into the margins, that Jamie Rose Bolin's name would be remembered, not for how she died, but for how fiercely her justice was pursued. In their opening statement, the district attorney's voice cracked. This was not an accident. This was not a crime of passion. This was planned, calculated, acted out with monstrous cruelty. Kevin didn't flinch. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage of Jamie entering the apartment complex. Kevin's internet search history. Disturbing queries about cannibalism, dismemberment, and necrophilia. His journal entries detailing the urges he had tried to control, then finally surrendered to. And then there was a confession. Cold, methodical. He had lured her inside with the promise of watching a movie. She had taken off her shoes at the door, sat on his couch. She trusted him. Minutes later, she was dead. The jury heard it all. They saw crime scene photos so gruesome some jurors looked away. They listened to forensic psychologists explain the clinical coldness of Kevin's mind. They watched Jamie's father take the stand, voice breaking as he recalled the moment he realized she wasn't coming home. And through it all, Kevin stared ahead, unmoved, His defense team didn't argue innocence. There was none to claim. Instead, they leaned into mental illness. They argued that Kevin was broken, suffering from a deep, untreated psychological disorder that warped his perception of right and wrong. He needed help. They said, not death, but the jury didn't buy it. In their eyes, Kevin was not mentally incapacitated. He was morally bankrupt. He had plotted the crime for months. He had fantasized about it for years. He had even written about how he'd love to be a serial killer. This wasn't a man who didn't know better. This was a man who chose evil. It took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. And when the judge read the sentence, death by lethal injection, the courtroom exhaled. For Jamie's family, it wasn't closure. There is no closure for that kind of loss. But it was something. I don't want to hate him. Jamie's father said outside courthouse. But I can't forgive him. Not now. Maybe not ever. The public response was fierce. Online forums lit up with outrage. Parents in Purcell and across Oklahoma clutched their children tighter. Strangers left teddy bears and flowers outside the Bolin home. Kevin's name became synonymous with evil, and Jamie's with innocence stolen. But even with justice served, questions lingered. How did no one notice the signs? Why hadn't anyone read his disturbing blog posts or reported his violent forum discussions? Could Jamie's death have been prevented? Kevin sat on death row, awaiting the inevitable, but the scars he left stretched far beyond the courtroom. They lingered in Jamie's empty bedroom, in the hearts of classmates who never saw her again, in the faces of detectives who still remember the moment they opened that Rubbermaid container. Years later, Kevin attempted to waive his appeals, saying he wanted to die, but a federal judge intervened, ordering psychological evaluations to ensure he was mentally competent to make that decision. Eventually, Underwood refiled his appeals, now trying to escape the very sentence he once accepted. The legal back and forth dragged on for over a decade. As of 2025, Kevin Ray Underwood remains on Oklahoma's death row, his execution postponed multiple times by the legal system's slow, deliberate pace. But Jamie's photo, innocent, smiling, and unaware, still hangs in courtrooms and homes, a reminder of what was taken, and of what justice tried to return. For Jamie, justice meant the world finally seeing the monster she met that day. For Kevin, it meant the world refusing to ever forget. There are crimes that shock a town, and then there are crimes that change it forever. In Purcell, Oklahoma, Jamie Rose Bolin's name is not just remembered, it's felt, like a bruise that never fades, like the echo of a scream still hanging in the air. Her murder didn't just take a life, it fractured something far more delicate, the community's sense of safety. The door Jamie entered that day seemed so harmless, the man behind it so unassuming. It taught everyone in Purcell a brutal lesson. Sometimes, the monster doesn't look like a monster at all, and that realization spread like a virus. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked began double-bolting them. Children who used to ride their bikes freely now walked home in pairs, under watchful eyes. Parents scrutinized every adult their kids spoke to, even those they'd known for years. And for some, paranoia became permanent. "She was just a child," whispered one woman in a local diner years later. How do you come back from that? The answer? You don't. Even now, 2 decades later, Jamie's story is told in hushed voices, at slumber parties, in local classrooms, by parents warning their children to never go with a stranger, even if he looks friendly. But Jamie didn't go with a stranger. She went with someone she knew, someone who offered kindness, someone who didn't look like danger. And that's what still haunts people the most. Kevin Ray Underwood's story, meanwhile, has mutated in dark corners of the internet. True Crime Podcast analyzes every word. Online forums rehash his blog posts and dissect his psyche. Some call him a cautionary tale, others the curiosity. But beneath the morbid intrigue lies a cold, terrifying truth. Monsters don't always hide in shadows. They walk among us. That chilling thought sparked change. In Oklahoma, Jamie's murder spurred conversations around mental health intervention, digital monitoring, and public safety reform. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at flagging disturbing online behavior earlier. Some advocated for mandatory psychiatric reviews in cases of violent ideation. Schools updated their stranger danger programs. Parents started teaching their children about tricky people, not just strangers, but anyone who makes them feel uncomfortable, even if they seem safe. But not all changes were external. Some were psychological, deep, quiet. Jamie's classmates, now grown, still carry her memory. Many recall the grief counselors in school, the memorial service, the empty seat in class. Some describe feeling guilt, even now, for not recognizing something was wrong. Others confess to locking their doors every night, even when they live in different cities, far from Purcell. Her father, unable to fully recover, became an advocate for child safety, but rarely speaks in public. "It hurts too much," he said in a rare interview. "You never stop hearing her laugh. And then one day, you realize you've forgotten what it sounds like. That's when the pain truly begins." The house where Jamie once lived has been repainted, remodeled, but locals say the energy is different, heavier, one neighbor claimed. And Underwood's old apartment? No one stays long. As for Kevin himself, he remains on death row. His appeals continue. And with each year that passes, the legal process grows more tangled. Some ask why he hasn't been executed yet. Others argue the delay is justice in itself. That every day he wakes up alone in a concrete cell is another day of reckoning. But nothing, not a trial, not a verdict, not even an execution, can bring Jamie back. The final lesson this case leaves behind isn't about monsters or mental illness or even justice. It's about vulnerability. How quickly innocence can be weaponized. How trust, once shattered, doesn't always grow back. And how, in a quiet Oklahoma town, the echo of one little girl's final footsteps will never fully fade. Jamie Rose Bolin was just 10 years old. She loved reading books, drawing animals, and wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She was kind, smart, and trusting. And her story reminds us that evil doesn't always wear a mask. It often wears a smile. If you've made it this far, thank you for remembering Jamie. This story wasn't told for shock. It was told so she's never forgotten. If her story moved you, consider sharing this video to help keep her memory alive. Subscribe for more real, human stories that deserve to be told. And let us know in a comment how this case impacted you. Together, we remember. Together, we protect.